This is an oral history recording with Louise Caccamise. The interviewer is Deborah McShane, who is a volunteer with the Historical Society. Today is November 3rd, 2017, and the interview is being recorded at the DeLand House. Good morning, Louise. It's so great to see you.
Good morning, Debbie.
Isn't it just a luscious day today?
Just perfect. Yes.
It was
beautiful
just
day.
Nice walking up the walkway and
nice breeze.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
And we're seeing the tent outside at the president's house, getting ready for the big homecoming weekend. Well, I understand that you were a student at Stevenson.
Yes, I was.
Mm-hmm. And what was your time at Stevenson like, and what years?
It was back in the 1950s, and I was a member of the last class that graduated outdoors. We had our graduation in the Forest of Arden.
And where was that located?
That was right just kind of behind Elizabeth Hall. We lined up in our caps and gowns on the sidewalk in front of Elizabeth Hall. And it was 7 o'clock in the morning. And we marched around to the Forest of Arden where they had seats ready for us. And the president of Winn-Dixie was the speaker that morning. So I'll always remember that day. About how many in your
class, do you recall?
Oh, probably about 300 maybe. Not really sure of the exact number.
And it was a nice, bright, sunny day?
Oh, perfect morning.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I was only 21.
Yeah, you feel it's a nice, ripe age at that, and you're ready to take on the world. So I'd like to know how you first came to DeLand.
Well, I came back in 1948 with my parents. My father had had bronchitis. We lived in western New York, which was a snow belt, about 60 miles from Niagara Falls. And he thought that Florida would benefit his health. And so we came here to DeLand, and to DeLand because of Stevenson and the wonderful cultural things that went with it.
So you were able to hear tell of DeLand up in New York?
Oh, yes.
Wonderful. So tell me about Chautauqua. Is that where you were born?
I was born on Chautauqua Lake, and the county seat in the little town of Mayville, New York. And Jamestown, which more people have heard of, is at the other end of the lake. It was a 20-mile lake, an Indian name, and it meant bag tied in the middle. If you went up in an airplane and you looked down on the lake, it looked like a bag tied in the middle. And so Chautauqua was a cultural center. There was a University of Pittsburgh used to come there with their symphony in the summer. And Cleveland would bring their drama, their playhouse there. And it was just a beautiful summer resort.
So your parents had been from New York to start with?
Oh, yes. My mother had been from Mayville, where I was born, and my father from Westfield, New York, which was the home of Welch grape juice. Grapes there, beautiful countryside there with the vineyards.
So did you have a big family, small family?
I was an only child.
Only child. Now, what did your parents do?
Well, my parents were older, and they were retired by the time I was born. And my mother never worked until many years after I graduated from college. She went and worked in a library again just for, enjoyment. And my father had been a commercial artist. He did murals for restaurants and the big billboards that they used to do at that time, with actually painting them, not doing them like they do with paper now.
So I understand that he did a lot of paintings that you have in your house.
He did. I have a lot of oil paintings, and he did watercolors and pen and ink, and I have a house full of paintings.
Did he do mostly landscapes, or?
Yes.
And what was his training?
He was untrained. It was just a natural talent. He had a brother who also did artwork, and his mother had painted. It just seemed to run in the family. Skipped right over me.
So when they came to DeLand, you were how old?
I was 14, and I started junior high here up on Rich and Clara.
And what was the name of the school?
It was DeLand Junior High, and then I went to the old high school that was later burned down, and graduated from it in 1952.
So how would you describe yourself as a young child and then a teenager?
Well, I always liked to read a lot. And I probably was not sports oriented at all. I could get out of it. took a book instead.
Uh-huh. Now, you told me that you used to be a bicycle rider, though.
I did do that. And in fact, I even skied up north on the snow. But that was about the extent of my sports.
So what did DeLand seem like when you first came here?
Seemed like a beautiful, quiet little town. There were, where we have commercial now, both in the north and south, there were 2-story homes, beautiful old homes, more like you would find up north, really, and beautiful trees. And, of course, fewer people and a lot less traffic.
Now, where did your family live?
We lived right on the boulevard, South Boulevard.
Is that house still here?
No, no.
When was it torn down?
Oh, many years ago, decades ago.
So what's there now, do you know?
Probably just commercial. Yes.
So you said when you first came, a lot of times little kids don't like moving from their, they like to stay put. So were you open to the move?
I thought it was kind of an adventure, really. It was fun. I was proud to have been in so many states that it took to come from New York to Florida. And it was fun.
That's great. So in school, what were your favorite subjects?
Well, believe it or not, Latin. I just loved Latin. And English, of course. And I went on, took the little journalism course that they had in high school. Worked on the school newspaper, the Growler. And
they're still publishing the Growler.
They are, yes.
They were handing out copies during the DeLand homecoming parade.
Mrs. Wyatt was the faculty advisor. Lived to be up into her 90s here in DeLand. Lovely lady.
So when you graduated, had you known all along that you were going to college, and how did you select Stetson?
Well, it was so handy, of course, and I really loved Stetson from what I had seen here. So if it hadn't been here, I think I still would have liked to have gone there.
So you say your father was retired, but did he work at all when you were here? He
did. Oh, he did some artwork individually for individual people, but not a job 9 to 5.
So when you started out at Stetson, what was your major?
Well, I ended up majoring in sociology and with a minor in business administration. And then I immediately started going to night school and taking elementary education. But then I went to summer school later on and took library, what they called library science then. And that was at Syracuse in New York.
So did you still have family up north, so you decided to attend the school there in Syracuse? And did you go to Syracuse, or? Syracuse
was one of the top 10 library schools at the time. And they had their summer program at Chautauqua. The Syracuse University brought their professors and their books and everything right to Syracuse. So if you were good and did your homework promptly, then you'd have your evenings for the concerts and the plays and the lectures. And it was just a beautiful summer.
So do you still go up to Chautauqua on occasion?
I used to. I used to go every summer.
Right. Yeah, I know there's quite a number of people here in DeLand who visit and go up there for their summer programs.
Oh, yes. Yes, people from all over the world go there, really. And presidents have spoken there, and many famous people.
So you finished your degree up?
Went the last summer at Syracuse on the campus there. That's the way they had it. 5 years at Chautauqua and 1 year at Syracuse.
So did you have a specific goal then? So you had a master's in library science?
Yes.
And were you intending to come back to DeLand at that time?
They were just starting the library program here in the schools in DeLand. I got in right on the very beginning of it.
Now, how did you get your first job?
They needed librarians, and I had gotten my training. So I was librarian at the Orange City School and at Boston Avenue, little elementary school. And then eventually I was full-time.
Now, you were telling me about a friend who helped get you your first job?
Well, I had a friend from college who they were interviewed then by the school board in order to get a job. And she got a job teaching first grade. And she told them that she had a friend that wanted to teach without my knowing it. And then she made an appointment for me and came back to DeLand and told me what dress to wear and everything. And I went for the interview. So and got the job.
And then, so how old were you at that time?
I was 22.
22.
And it was a job teaching 5th grade for 1 year in Sanford. And so we shared an apartment and taught there in Sanford.
And, but then you came back to DeLand?
Yes, that school I taught in is now the Historical Society in Sanford in Seminole County. It was the Sanford Grammar School at that time.
So how long did you work at the elementary level as a librarian?
I worked there 1 year. That was just a 1 year position. Then I taught in Longwood for a year, and then I taught 5 years in Enterprise, 4th grade. And no air conditioning at that time. The windows were wide open, and just whatever.
So is the Enterprise School now the museum in Enterprise?
They moved part of it over there for that. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Great. So then you moved back to DeLand. Did you move back into your family home, or did you?
I lived with my parents for a while, yes. So I got my own apartment.
Great, great. So you got married, and can you tell me about your husband and your family life?
Well, that was the nicest thing I think ever happened in my life, was when I got married.
And how did you meet your husband?
I met him right in my own living room at home. I had gone away on an errand, and I came back, and he had purchased property next to my parents just as an investment, and he was sitting there on the sofa when I walked in the living room.
And you came in and said?
Well, my mother said, "This is my daughter." So that's how we met.
And you said you were involved in a painting job?
I was painting that morning. I had my hair in curlers with a scarf on, and everything that could be unmatched was unmatched. I looked terrible.
And then when was the next time you met him?
Not till Christmas again. And he came back from New York, and he was here in DeLand, and just happened to run into him at the drugstore, really. And we met there, and he asked me if he could call me. So, and we dated from then on.
And then where did you have your home here in DeLand?
Well, in the very beginning, we lived in the condos up at Alhambra Villas on Hill Avenue. Then we moved to Brandywine. We were there 28 years. Great,
great. So you have quite an involvement with a number of organizations here in town. What was the first organization that you became involved with?
Probably the American Association of University Women. We used to have a membership of about 100 ladies, and we met upstairs at the Carleton Union at Stevenson. And I served as president of that organization at one time, and it was and then I was always active with the Friends of the Library, and the DeLand Public Library, and the Garden Club, and the Historical Society.
And you are involved with you've been involved with the Guild, with the Museum of Art.
At the Museum of Art. I was a charter member there.
So you worked how many years as a librarian?
23. Because I had taught 7 years before that.
And then when you retired, you were going to find all this time on your hands. How did you decide to pick up a pen, or would you say, or did you actually start writing on a computer, or did you do it longhand?
No, I started on a typewriter first, electric typewriter, and then went to computers afterwards.
So you retired, and how did you decide to spend your day?
Well, with these organizations that I've just mentioned, and particularly the Historical Society is how I really got interested in local history and in writing about certain aspects that did not seem to have already been written about, like the history of the library and the...
So was that your first book?
That was my first book, yes, 20 years ago. More.
And how did you actually begin that?
I began it with looking at the microfilm of the DeLand Sun News and looking for library articles, and then going out and talking with any family members that were still living, and with board members and trustees, and interviews.
So when did the library start?
In 1912.
And it's been ongoing since that time.
They have the pictures of all the libraries in DeLand, which were taken from my book, in the auditorium at the library. They're along one wall, showing every building that the library has been in DeLand.
So when was the most recent library finished?
1995.
Oh, great. Now, I understand that you were also involved with the Friends of the Library and the starting of their bookstore.
I'm president currently of that organization.
And so that was your first book. And how long did it take to write it, and who published it?
I kept it on the back burner, so to speak. I didn't work like 3 hours a day. I just worked at it, usually evenings, quite a bit. It was published by Luther's in New Smyrna Beach, which was a small historical publishing company at the time.
So was it difficult to find a publisher, or how did you go about?
No, I knew about them, and I thought that the book and the publisher would fit, and they did.
Now, in your younger life, had you seen yourself as a writer or researcher?
Well, I always loved reading, and I always loved writing little stories when I was younger. And my mother wrote poetry and loved reading, and so I was always surrounded by books.
So you published that one, and then what was your next venture?
Came here to the Historical Society, and I was the librarian here, and getting ready to process books one day, and I had in my hands the handwritten minutes of Hetty Austin, who had been the secretary of the Old Settlers here in DeLand. And I just looked it over before I started to assign a number to it. And it was so interesting that I did nothing that afternoon but sit in a corner and read her minutes. And I thought that everyone should have access to them. They were so wonderful in depicting the history of DeLand as it started. And so I asked Bill Dreggers, he was executive director at that time, if I could possibly take that home and work on it with transcribing it. And he was delighted. So I took it home and transcribed it, and then I added pictures from the archives here in our files, and made an index. I love the index, and we published it here in DeLand. And
So has it been in republished, or when was that first year? When
well,
did you publish
we had it with the kind of coil in the back like that. I know I spent hours here putting it together. About 100 copies we began with. And since then it's been done by a printing company here in DeLand.
And about what time frame, what year was?
Oh, it was probably about 10 years after I wrote my library book, early 2000s.
So when you finished that, put it on the shelf, what was your next...
Well, I was active with the Garden Club, and they had never had their history recorded. It was just all over in their little storage room. And so I wrote the history of the Garden Club, which was from 1927 through to about 20 years ago. And that was published. Every member received a copy of it, and it was in the local libraries. And then this year, they celebrated their 90th anniversary, and they asked me to bring it up to date. So I wrote the last 20 years of it, and we republished it in a new little booklet.
Very neat. So I understand that you've been a member of a number of the circles there.
I have been a member of the Garden Club since 1967 in 4 different circles. Each one would disband for various reasons, and then I would join another circle.
So are you a flower gardener to this day?
I love to garden, love flowers. And I remember the Daisy Circle now.
And then you continued on beyond that?
With publishing?
With publishing?
I did the history of the street names here in DeLand. Memory Lane, I called it. And there are 675 streets in that book. And I used the plat maps of DeLand as my beginning for that. And followed through with census and work. And
what first gave you the idea to pursue something like that?
Really, way back when I was at Stetson. I used to drive down Minnesota Avenue, and I would see Julia Avenue there. And I thought, who was Julia? And I asked people, and no one had heard of her. And I thought, what did a lady do to get a street named after her? But when I started researching, did the plat maps, I found the family there, and then I found the census in Salisbury, North Carolina. And the next street to Julia was Salisbury. And so when I went on to the census, there was a census with 3 little boys and 1 little girl named Julia. And they were from Salisbury, North Carolina. And so that was, I thought, this is going to be a cinch to do. But every street was not that easy.
Now, you were telling me when they first got together to name the streets in DeLand. Do you recall how they did that?
Yes, they sat on what became the corner of Indiana and the Boulevard. They sat on a pine log, and they had their first meeting of what became the Old Settlers. And they talked about the streets. They named it that day. They named the Boulevard, and they named several of the other streets: Rich Avenue, Clara, Amelia, and those first.
And who were these people who were?
They were the first settlers.
The first settlers. So they would be people like.
Well, they came from all the different states, and that's how the states, the streets got state names, like Indiana and New York for Henry DeLand, and where they came from. They named their streets for there, the bit of memory.
Oh, that's neat. So,
the horses were parked that day. They were no cars. They were hitched there nearby while they met.
So I understand you've done some indexing too for some of the books here at the Historical Society.
One of those persons who really likes to index. And I did an index for our centennial volume, Reflections. And, I also did an index for Helen DeLand's book.
That's great.
It was more recent.
So you don't parcel out your day that, there's 3 hours for writing in the morning, but somehow you were able to incorporate the time because you have quite an accomplishment, quite a number of books. That
I often work later at night, maybe till midnight. And, with
you
writing.
Burn the midnight oil.
I do. Burn my candle at both ends.
That's great. That's great. So how do you see DeLand? How is it really different today from when you first came?
Well, so much more commercial and so much more traffic, more people, more congestion. We still have that core, though, of what DeLand was in the beginning.
And I think do you find that there's a pretty good mix of the old and the new? It seems like it still is a very welcoming town.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So right now, what is your primary involvement? What organizations are you working with?
Well, I'm still working with the same organizations. I'm still president of the Friends, and I'm still librarian here, and I've been secretary here at the Historical Society. I'm still writing. I'm working on a book of the history of the churches now, and keep it on the back burner.
So I know that you've also been involved in some porch chats for the Historical Society.
Yes, you and I did one together.
We did one together, and one of your favorite characters is Miss Hetty Austin. So can you tell us a little bit about what you find intriguing about Hetty?
Well, she was a talented lady. She wrote so beautifully when she wrote her minutes and memorials of the old settlers. And she was very musical. She created music, and it had some compositions that were in the Library of Congress. And just an all-around talented lady, interested in starting the churches here, the First Methodist Church, getting money for it and funding, and a real leader of women at a time when women were not that prominent, really.
And she was really forthright with Mr. DeLand, I think, also in asking
She was a college graduate. And, her father had been a minister.
And she...
Right now, there's a Hetty Austin room at the United Methodist Church, and her photograph is there.
That's great.
We still remember her.
So, has there been a time in DeLand where there's been any event in your lifetime where you feel like the town that really had an impact on you, a particular time period? So you lived here during the 60s, and so you've been here since the 40s. But was there a time where you felt like something of great political or social impact happened in town that you feel like had a...
Not really. It doesn't stand in my mind. The thing that stands out probably most is when the high school was burned, and we had to build a new high school because of it. That was local, of course. But
so we've had a number of fires in DeLand, it seems like, as we look through the history. Yeah, whether it was the building materials or heating sources at that time. But Yeah. So what do you think is the very best thing about living in DeLand?
Probably the impact of Stevenson University, and certainly there are other organizations also. The libraries are wonderful, the whole county system. The garden club has a big impact. When you look at the flowers that are along the streets, the baskets, and they plant those every quarter and take care of them with the weeding and such. It really beautifies the town.
And what do you think of the importance of the Historical Society is on DeLand?
Oh, I think it's so important to keep it ever in people's minds what happened here.
And so were you involved in the very early stages of the Historical Society here, or how did you first become involved?
Well, I came when they did not have a library yet. There were books everywhere. They might be in closets or on the floor or just anywhere. And I gathered them together and classified them, and we found a location for them. So it was the beginnings of really an organized library.
So I understand that you've been the president of the Historical Society as well.
We've had a lot of good presidents since.
And you're still serving as secretary.
Well, I'm just finishing my term now. I'm going to continue on the board, and I will be able to devote more time to the library now. That's one thing that I'm happy about.
Wonderful. So what would you say stands out as the most memorable event in your life, or the best time of your life, if there was something that you could do over again or have that time?
Well, I guess graduating from college, but really marrying and the life that I led after that with a lot of travel and just a wonderfully happy life.
So what was your husband's profession?
He was a real estate broker. He had his own office for over 25 years here in DeLand, Alliance Realty.
And you say you traveled quite a bit. Where did you travel?
Well, we had kind of a ritual. We would go to Sanibel and Captiva every Christmas. We would go to Charleston in the spring, to Asheville, North Carolina, in that region in the fall. And then in the summers, we went to New England and sometimes California, where my husband had two sisters. And we went to a few trips to Europe, the British Isles, England, and that. But we drove mostly, so we were totally, on our own schedule, which was really wonderful.
And so your husband passed away a number of years ago?
7 years ago this Christmas.
7 years ago. And do you continue to travel?
I haven't really.
Haven't?
I'm thinking about it again.
Do you have a place that you'd like to visit?
I would just take tours now, group tours, so it would be that type of thing in the United States.
So based on your experience, what sort of advice would you give a young person today?
I would tell them to get all the education they could get, whatever their likes were. Wouldn't have to be, a college. It could be, there's other trades and such. And to just enjoy every day and try to help others.
So as time rolls on, you certainly have had a very big impact in DeLand. How would you like to be best remembered?
Well, I'd like to be remembered, I guess, for the local history books I wrote.
So Louise, with the number of books that you've written with various publishers and for different organizations, I wondered whether you're really developing quite a nest egg with those books.
No, on the contrary, I have given the profits to each organization. The book on the library I gave to the library and the garden club and the Historical Society, the 2 books. So I hope that it has helped them.
I'm sure it really has. And I mean, I think far beyond the money, the fact of your energy and devotion to each one of those groups is quite astounding, in the idea that you were able to do the research and pull the information together and make it so accessible to people. So you have really added such a treasure trove to DeLand.
And it's been a great joy.
Yeah.
Great joy.
It's just wonderful, too, that you had that time following your retirement to have that. I see this curiosity that you have, where you're interested in finding about the names of the streets and the background of trying to look behind what has come before. So I know that DeLand appreciates so much everything that you have contributed to to making this just the most special small town in all of Florida.
Thank you.
And I want to say how much I've enjoyed speaking with you, and also having the opportunity to do the porch chats with you. And I hope that we'll have something coming up soon in this next season.
I hope we will. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.